course, some weeds are actually medicinally useful, but probably you have other with that space. So you really have to think ahead and say, when you're taking it on, you say, okay, well, how much weeding am I willing to take on? All right, and also processing your harvest takes time and a little bit of equipment. This is a wonderful little herb called Viola tricolor, and it comes up in the places, and it is very soothing to the skin and to the respiratory system. It contains uric acid, which is, well, it is actually a relative of aspirin, so it has that faint wintergreen taste. It takes a lot of flowers to do much of anything, but what I like to do, I actually grow it in pots just because it's cute. And to go out, and in the morning, I just break off the little flowers just after they open and put them on a screen to dry, and they dry to something, small. And then you can scoop up those dried flowers and drop them into your fluty mix, or your cold and fluty mix, and that is really, really nice. The other thing you can do in a little vodka or vinegar and use that to treat another thing that kids get all in, insect bites and skin rashes and things like that, because it's basically aspirin in a plant form. And so, also something to know, the flowers are so small that I don't think it's physically possible to overdose on them. But if you have a sensitivity to the aspirin family, then is going to be something you probably just go to look at. Okay, so some equipment that you need an electric dehydrator. Any will work. The kind you get at garage sales is totally fine. You need a crock pot. Again, anything will work, but it needs to have some temperature control. High and low is plenty, but again, some temperature control. Various sizes of canning jars. The best way to keep your herbs secure after you get them pressed and dried, or whatever you need to do with them, is to keep them cranked down in canning jars and put the canning jars away somewhere dry and dark, stable, and cool if you can pull it off. Labels. You need labels. It's really easy to not know what wad of vegetation is what, especially if it's sitting around in your dining room for a couple of months. And don't ask me how I know this. Okay, a lot of people keep a notebook with a log and a journal. All right. Ingredients that you need to make tinctures. You can make it with Everclear, but they're awfully harsh and not. They're hard to drink, especially for kids. So cheap vodka will definitely do the trick. Okay. You need white sugar. You can use the fancy sugar, but there's really no need, because you're just using the fact that sucrose is a glucose and a fructose molecule. You're not trying to get the flavor out of it. All right, you need some organic oil. I recommend a high temperature oil like sunflower and safflower, which you can put in the crock pot and use for extractions in the crock pot or in a double boiler. And olive oil, which of course, the best olive oil is in itself medicinal. You can use any organic olive oil. It doesn't have to be the really fancy stuff you put on your salad. That's a waste of money. But use a good quality organic olive oil, and it's really important, because anything that you put on your skin, 40% of it is going to get absorbed. So if you use olive oil, which is extracted with toluene, is what they use, then you're consuming that. All right, cheesecloth or old sheets. I keep old sheets around, stacked up with the dog towels, and cut them up for pressing herbs out. Okay, and a hand sieve for seeds. This is holy basil, and holy basil is wonderful stuff. It grows around here. You can keep it nice and put it in a nice and warm spot. It's from the Indian Ayurvedic medicinal tradition, and it's a member of the mint family. It's very helpful for the upper respiratory system. I have managed to get it to go to seed in the greenhouse, but like many things which were raw around here, it doesn't like to make seed quite so happily. It needs a long system, and it's used.
I'm sorry.
Holy basil.
Oh, okay.
But it also makes a very nice tea just to have a seed. Okay. Now, cultural traditions have the same herb. Essentially, it's the same alkaloid collection for similar conditions. This can be really amusing when you go through and actually look at it. So, very often you'll see in the Chinese traditional medicine and in the Western European traditional medicine, you'll see that they will be two different varieties, but the ants are going to be closely related. Sometimes they'll be the same thing, except in Chinese. I mean, exactly the same thing, except in Chinese. Wonderful example being sage. My college veterans was a long time ago, but it's the Chinese name for sage is something like Sawin, and this is a connection which is so old that even the word is the same. It goes way back to the way back. All right. And very often what will happen is that something with the same medicinal constituents and the same properties and uses will get renamed with an old name for something else that people know about but doesn't grow there. A classic example being the balm of Gilad, and Gilad is the northern region of Israel where the cowboys run around, which is kind of cute. Jewish and Palestinian cowboys running around with their cows on horses in the Gilad region. But there's a small, short, scrubby Mediterranean herb that grows around there that is a wonderful herb for topical treatment of things like burns and other skin problems. It is antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial. It's pretty good stuff. But of course it doesn't grow at all well outside of its native region, so that around here, if you ask for balm of Gilad, what you get is, and you even get a different pronunciation. In English it's Gilead, is the buds of the poplar tree, cottonwood or southernwood, and they just look like giant mouse poop.
Greasy,
sticky, giant mouse poop. In the spring, before the trees open, go around and see if you can find some with enough low-hanging branches that you can get yourself a good fat yogurt full of poplar buds, because it's enormously useful stuff. You can tincture it, and you can soak the buds in oil, and that is the basis for a very powerful burn remedy.
I actually have some if you guys would like to smell it.
Okay.
Does it smell like right?
No, it smells like people that are familiar with it. Certain times of the year when the buds are getting like really resinous, you can hear. And some people are really allergic and will sneeze a lot. Yeah, like in the wintertime. That's just coconut oil.
Wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
Smell it.
I actually have a friend that used it so much that she became allergic to it after a while, started getting rashes, even though she used it all the time for years.
You know, so something careful to be with herbs is that you can definitely develop allergies from using them too much.
don't come home louder than this.
Yes, fun stuff. So let's talk about your basic herbal preparations. You'll notice they're also on the notes. All right, so infusion is tea. And so it's just a dried herb, sometimes a fresh herb, which has been soaked in boiling or hot water to make tea. Usually we dry herbs to dry the water off and to concentrate the medicinal components, and also to have a little transformation of the alkaloid. And so, and then once it's dry, they have varying shelf lives, but they crank down in your canning jars, they can be stable for several years. Some things, lemon balm has notoriously short shelf life, so that's really year to year. But despite all these people telling you to replace all your herbs every year, I had stuff go 3 to 5 years, be fine. Particularly if it's something that's where the leaves are greenish or grayish, and so it's a dry climate herb in the first place.
What's the intake amount with infusion? I like how you said that topical you absorb 40% of it.
Mhm.
Is there something similar you could say about infusions?
Well, it's going to go through the digestive system and then into your blood like anything. And so you typically make it just exactly like you would make tea. Use a heaping tablespoon for a small teapot. And, some people use a neti pot and make it really strong. Okay. And you can surely do that. But, start out with 1 or 2 tablespoons and see if that's about right. You can always dilute it with hot water or add more later.
Mhm.
Okay, so a decoction is your things that are woody, like roots and bark and things, are going to be dry and hard. And so what you want to do is chop them and then you boil them. And you typically boil them for about half an hour. And it's not hard boiled, it's like glub, glub, glub. The slow simmer that you use for making glub, glub. So you want to sit there and go glub, glub, glub for half an hour and sometimes an hour to extract, to decoct. Okay, so tincture, you're going to soak your herb, either dried or fresh, usually dried, in cheap vodka. And now how do you do that? The easiest way to do it is take a pint or quart jar and roughly chop, but do not pulverize the herb because you want the vodka to move around in it. This is anything that you're going to get the stuff out of. You want the liquid to move around the herb. And so you're going to roughly pack your jar so there's some space in there for the vodka to move around. And if depends on how dense the stuff is. So I usually fill the jar, if it really chops down fine, I usually fill it only about a third full and the rest vodka. But if it's something where it's an herb that's still on the branch and you can just kind of bend it down, then just stuff a bunch in the jar. And then you want to make sure that you've got a good 1/2 inch of alcohol covering your herb to keep it from rotting. And you put your jar on, your lid on your jar, put it someplace dark, and leave it for 2 weeks to a month. And then press out your herb. And you can press it out with, the easiest way to do it is just a jelly bag, or I like old sheets because I can throw them. And you just, for larger quantities, I have an Italian tabletop grape press. Sort of just cool. Costs a few $100. I bought it several years ago.
Is it metal or wood?
I say metal. Oh. And it's made for making tabletop amounts of grapes. I actually make wine with the thing.
Nice.
But it's also very useful for dropping that old sheet full of stuff into and pressing it out. So
So you actually have a fabric inside your press
Mhm.
with your herbs?
Mhm.
Okay.
and it's got a basket in there, but since it's made for wine, the holes are a little coarse for herbs.
Oh.
So depending on
I
what
see
it
what you're
is, I
saying.
can get a lot of leaf through here. All right, so oil infusions, you want to, some things you want to use wort. And here's another one where you want to loosely pack your St. John's wort into your jar because the oil has got to get around it. And then crank it down and stick it in the sun and it will turn a brilliant red. And when it turns red, you know it's almost ready, and then give it another week and then you're ready to press. And then there's comfrey, which everybody will tell you to extract the same in the sun, and everybody must not live in the Pacific Northwest because it always molds.
Mhm.
So way to do that one is coarse it chop, drop in your crock pot, put it high for an hour, maybe two, but no more. You can see it when your comfrey starts to crisp up, it's done. You're not gonna get anything more out of it. And at that point, strain it into an old sheet and squish it out. And your hands feel wonderful afterwards because comfrey contains allotonin and it's healing to the skin. And it's a wonderful component for massage oils, for salves, for burn remedies. Okay, so so your a poultice is a mashed up fresh plant. And our favorite weed is plantain. You can use narrow leaf plantain or broadleaf plantain. It really doesn't matter, despite the fact that everybody will tell you that. But if you have narrow leaf plantain in your garden, then you want to leave a few because it's a first aid herb. And what you do is you just take it and you can either chop, put it on the affected spot, and if you're really clever, then you get another narrow leaf plantain leaf and you tie it on. But it's wonderful because you're working in the garden and you need a first aid plant and kit. Now, some things you want to use a compress. A compress is where you make an infusion first. You make a strong infusion, and then you soak a cloth in that warm and wring it out and put it on the offended area. In the ages before antibiotics, the mini plants containing antibacterial elements were used as compresses to treat wounds. And so what they would do would be to soak the scab off and allow the herb, and then change the compress several times, and allow the herb to work on the part that was suppurating, and hopefully they would catch the infection in time, and then whatever it was that was wounded would heal cleanly. That was always the goal. Okay. Glycerin or vinegar is sometimes used instead. Some alkaloids will dissolve in glycerin. Some of them will dissolve in vinegar. Usually the use of vinegar is because for someone who's trying to completely avoid alcohol, even the little amount that you would pull of tincture. All right, so some useful ways. Comfrey, yellow dock and dock are both herbs that help to express toxins from the system, and it's particularly useful if you have been taking a course of antibiotics and you're done and you have to get rid of the antibiotic now. You want your microbiome to reestablish itself, so making a tincture of yellow dock and burdock, either one or both, works extremely well. Burdock, of course, is an invasive weed, so I have enough in my garden to physic all of Whatcom County. All right, horsetail, which is another useful but extremely invasive weed. If you don't have any in your garden, don't plant it. What you want to do is take no more than the top third, preferably. If it's a big plant, you just take the top maybe yay much. But you take the tops of the horsetail plants, you dry them and you put them in a jar. And a horsetail is used to cure the symptoms of deep respiratory infections and to ameliorate the symptoms of serious deep lung damage. My mother had Legionnaire's disease. She went to Florida and was the keynote speaker at a conference in a hotel and came back with Legionnaire's disease. And the effects of, she had quite a bit of lung. Actually, over a period of about 2 years, we got rid of all of the symptoms. Probably we cannot ever cure the deep-rooted whatever it is, but the symptoms went away just from drinking horsetail tea.
Yeah, so horsetail, is it better to be harvesting it? Because I've been told once it's open that you don't want to harvest it. Like once the horsetail comes up and then opens the fronds out, does it really matter when you're harvesting it for?
Well, you always want younger plants if you're going to harvest the vegetative parts.
Okay.
So I would say just after it opens would be perfect.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Does not seem to make any difference. Really.
Oh, okay.
Okay, right. St. John's wort is something that here's the medicinal one is wild. It's also it's not that hard to get rid of. It's an illegal cultivate in Whatcom County, although I have never gotten in any trouble in it with my city garden. But it's because taking St. John's wort internally causes fair-skinned people to sunburn. But that's not why it's illegal. It's because it causes sheep to sunburn because they have white skins underneath the hair. And so they don't, that's right. So therefore,
I'll hide the closet while I'm taking my tincture then.
It's a wonderfully useful plant because St. John's wort heals nerves. And it does so both internally and externally. I use it only externally. Internally, it can be psychoactive. It's what's called a okay. There's a class of psychiatric drugs called monoxidase inhibitors, something like that. Anyway, people who are taking this do definitely St. John's wort internally, but externally, I put it in first aid.
Wait, are you saying if somebody's on like some sort of pharmaceutical that the St. John's wort would be potentially blocking that or something?
Well, it's an antidepressant.
Mm-hmm.
The St. John's wort is,
Mm-hmm.
so it can interact with prescription pharmaceuticals in unpredicted ways.
Okay.
So just so you know, right? Chickweed is a common and cheerful weed. You gather it in the spring and make it into salve, and it is the best thing for pulling stubborn splinters and for, again, minor injuries of the skin. Nettles in the spring, when they first come out, they make a wonderful substitute for spinach, and you can make there's a nettle and tofu casserole that just rocks. Really good, and you only get it in March when the nettles are young.
Laura's sister makes nettle cupcakes.
Nettle cupcakes.
Nettle lemon bomb cupcakes.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're
Oh my
so
gosh.
good.
Okay,
Rock.
that's self.
I'll send you the recipe.
Please do.
Rocket. Okay. So, but also you take those same young nettles and you dry them and around because they are a wonderful source of all kinds of minerals and things in the body. That's why we love them in the spring, because the body craves those nutrients after the winter. Okay, shepherd's purse, which is a traditional medicinal, it's not used very much now, and fennel, which is a wonderfully invasive, useful plant. Fennel is edible at all stages. When it's really young, you cut it and put it in a salad. You can get the kind that bulbs, which is the Florence fennel, or the kind that doesn't bulb, which is the non-Florence fennel. And you get bronze fennel, it's a lovely ornamental. You can take the pollen of the flowers. The reason the Italians have recipes involving fennel plant pollen is because they want to get rid of it before it goes to fennel seed. Okay, and so, but you take just take a piece of white paper and you take that yellow pollen and shake it out, and you get quite a little bit of pollen, and you put that in a little jar, and then you put it in the spaghetti, and man, that rocks. The other thing is that when you do get fennel seed, you go around and collect the seeds, and those go straight in sausages and spaghettis and things. So fennel is very useful stuff. Tastes a little shitty. All right, but it is also invasive and a real pain to get out of your perennial beds.